Hello, and welcome to the Watershed Moments podcast, where I and other therapists discuss real life, everyday mental health issues to give you real and practical help to live a healthier life for yourself and with others. Now, if you want more content like this, be sure to visit our website at watershedinitiative.com to dig into the library of podcasts, articles, and courses that we've made just for you. And of course, if you need face-to-face help, definitely reach out to our partner affiliate, Lifeology of Richardson and Frisco at 214-556-0996 to get connected with a therapist or life coach. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show. Okay, well, everyone, welcome to the first Watershed podcast. This is a podcast that we hope to be doing on a regular basis. This is our first one, and I've got a couple of therapists here with me. I've got Adrian Jones, LPC intern. Say hi, Adrian.
Hey there. How are y'all doing? Good morning.
And I've also got Laura Harrison, LPC.
Hi, how are y'all?
So we've got a podcast that we're going to be doing on a regular basis, hopefully. And this series, we're kicking off a podcast, number of episodes on the issue of conflict. And so what we want to do is be able to talk through key areas that we've seen in our caseloads as therapists when it comes to marriage, when it comes to working with teens, parents, and stuff like that. That really impact the way we do conflict. So today we're going to talk specifically about two concepts, two things we see on a frequent basis. The first one is going to be called regulation, and the second one's called resiliency. These both have to do with how we handle our emotions. So real quick, let me just introduce the concept of regulation. And I'd like to just be able to talk about it a little bit more openly with the two of you and see what you guys think, what you guys see in your own work as therapists, but also maybe how it might relate to you in your personal life as well. I mean, we're all, we have got family, we've got kids, we're married, and so that's a thing that happens to us all on a regular basis. So regulation, let's talk about that real quick. The idea of regulation is the ability to be able to regulate your emotional experience, your emotional flow. And so people can tend to veer on one of two sides too much. One being stuffing too much of their emotions and not allowing themselves to emote or express, and the other side being just a free flow, just a complete overload of just an emotional expression. And so that could look like anger, rage, whatever you call it. So that's the first concept. So you guys tell me, in your own experience, again, in your own caseload or in your personal life, how have you seen that be an important factor when it comes to how conflict is handled? Anyone want to start?
Well, I'd say like most people don't even realize that that's a thing.
Yeah.
Like they handle their emotions in the way they handle their emotions, and they don't even realize that there's an opportunity to do it differently.
Yeah.
So I think with most people that I talk to and what I've observed of my life and my kids and my family is that it's not necessarily ever taught. And so that makes it difficult for people. It's like a new concept to a lot of people.
Yeah. That gets a little bit into like family of origin stuff and what a lot of us were taught like when we were growing up too. So yeah, what are the things that you see as well, just in your own experience, the cultural background that you have, experiences that you have, what people are kind of trained to do in life?
I think even more so, family of origin plays a huge role. To Laura's point, when she touched in on the aspect of people don't know. Well, on the flip side, sometimes that's all they know, right?
Yeah.
That's all they've ever seen is, no, I spew. That's how we emote, right?
Yeah.
Or we stuff it. I saw dad stuff, right? Or I saw mom stuff, or that's how people kind of communicate with each other. And so then when they get into the relationship and they attach with that person, and then they have that same kind of flow, it feels normal to them. And it feels that dysfunction is the dysfunction that they've always seen and they've always grown up with. And once they get to a healthier state, right, they're like, what's going on? So I've noticed that as well and deal with that. But on the individual side, I think it looks a little bit different for me personally.
Yeah.
Personally, for the individual side, it's what I grew up with was the third part was the leaky, right? Like it wasn't always either a spew or a stuff. Sometimes it was a little bit of both. You didn't know what you were going to catch, so that created almost its own little awkwardness growing up. So I get it. That's how we communicate, and I think that's the brilliance of this, is that we can learn better ways to do it. Really,
yeah. One of the things I'm reminded of constantly as a therapist is that we have the opportunity to be able to see into the lives of a number of people. And so we are gifted with that observation, that constant experience to be able to know what's going on for a lot of people from different walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
For most people, they don't have that. Like most people who are listening to this podcast, for example, really only know what they've known from their family growing up and what they experience in their families today, right?
Right.
And so a lot of that definition, as you guys are talking about, is like, what is normal? What is healthy? Like, there's no ruler framework for that. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of us don't share how we do conflict with one another. Like, that's not something that we do in our friendships or in our community and that kind of thing. So the more isolated we are in that, like, the more difficult it becomes to know, like, what does healthy even look like? What does that mean, right? So yeah, I like that observation. I just wanted to be able to kind of bring that in too as well, because we all can help normalize that for one another and for our listeners too, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think people a lot of times just kind of feel like this is just the way I do it, and there's not another way.
Yeah.
Like they don't understand that things can be different. Like this is just how I process my emotions, and people just need to deal with that. And or I can't be different, or there's guilt around it too.
Right.
Like I just can't control my anger. I just can't control my, and so there's like this almost resignation to it.
Yeah.
That's who I am.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
That
People just need to
moment.
accept me. I'm an angry person. Or,
that moment.
Yeah, or on the flip side, so that would be like someone who just like kind of free flows, like spews everything. On the flip side, it's the person who feels deeply like afraid of their voice, right?
Yeah.
Who feels guilty for sharing what they think and what they feel, and so they stuff, right? And so I've always kind of thought in my mind the analogy that I have or the imagery that I have is it's like a dam, right? That as we live life and we have these different experiences, that reservoir of emotion just keeps building up, and we can do that for a while. We all have the ability to be able to do that to some point. But if we're not careful and we continue to just build that reservoir up, that dam is going to break at some point in time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's typically what I'll see in a number of people, and also for myself. I'm a notorious stuffer. I remember growing up, I learned very early on in my family that that rage was the way we communicated, and I kind of went the opposite spectrum. I just went like, I'm never going to do that. So I put a lid on that really quick, but I would just stuff, and I found myself starting to leak after a while.
Yeah, very similar. Very similar. I do the same thing. I'll tend to like be a little passive aggressive comments would be the likely way that I would like let that kind of anger out. So.
Yeah, so I think the idea that we're trying to present here when it comes to emotional regulation is if our emotions act like a dam, there's a reservoir of emotions that build up, and there's like a dam that kind of blocks the free flow of all that stuff. There's a regulator valve, right? That there's a way to release the pressure on that dam to where we can allow the flow of those emotions to go through, but in such a way that we can begin to understand it better, that we can pinpoint and parse out the different emotions that we're feeling. So instead of it just being this big ball of rage or anger or frustration, or that we can, with regulation, be able to pinpoint, that I'm actually feeling anxiety, or I'm feeling fear, or feeling pain, or loneliness, those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, that you have to be in a place where you can feel vulnerable enough to say those things, because that makes it really hard. I think that's the barrier to regulate emotions a lot of time, is the ability to be vulnerable with someone and say, I'm feeling this feeling, fear, vulnerable. I mean, especially vulnerable.
Right.
And it takes some self-awareness as well to recognize and say to myself, where is this anger coming from? Because it could be misplaced. I could be viewing this through my own personal narrative, when in actuality, it's just my thing, right? So there are moments of having that self-awareness, and you kind of stop and say, well, what am I feeling right now? Like, what is this? Because I'm feeling a little maybe jealousy. Where's that coming from, right? Or I'm feeling a little frustration. Where's this coming from? Sometimes for me, when I can start to parcel out and backtrack and kind of dive deep within myself and ask myself the hard questions, then it starts to come out of, oh, wait, I know what that is. That's me, right? That's 10-year-old me doing this, right? And it's like, oh, okay, let's backtrack.
That's
a little bit.
It's always a very disturbing, unsettling realization. You're like, that's me.
It has nothing to do with you. That's all me. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I talk to my clients about, and I try to do with myself, not always successfully, is building that pause, to like give yourself time to, like, when you start to have that feeling or start to want to like either spew on someone or say something that's like not quite right, to give yourself a chance to go, wait a second, where is this actually coming from, and what is the origin of that? And that's the hard skill to build, I think.
Yeah, we'll get into that in the next episode when we talk about flooding, because that's the whole concept of being able to do this in the moment of a heated conflict when you're amped up. It's really hard to do because there's a lot of emotions that are going through at once in a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so the reason why I started this episode off with these two different concepts, I really kind of think of them as base muscles, like the core muscles that we have to have in order to be able to pull off most every other thing in conflict. Because once I mean, we've all experienced it before where we're in a conflict and we get triggered by something and something just kind of moves, and all of a sudden, like, you're not thinking straight anymore. Like, I can say personally as a therapist, I know this stuff through and through, but if I'm in a conflict with my wife or anyone else, like, I start getting foggy and it starts getting hard to really know what's what anymore. And so that regulation muscle becomes incredibly important to be able to figure out, okay, well, what's going on? Why am I feeling this way? That kind of thing, right? So let's go ahead and tee up the next part of that muscle, which is the resiliency part. So if regulation is more the expression, how you express and emote, resiliency is going to be a little bit more of how you withstand the expression of other people's emotions. And so when you feel emotions coming at you, whether it's anger, frustration, blame, criticism, your emotional resiliency, that muscle allows you to be able to remain steadfast. It remains you to be rooted so that you don't feel overwhelmed by that or feel like you then get flooded and you have to start spewing or stuffing or whatever that might be as well. And so it's a little bit of the other side of the same coin, if I can put it that way. So let's just leave that there and let's kind of talk around that. What do you guys see, what do you experience when it comes to that particular area?
I love that area, to be honest. The reason being is that's the moment where you can kind of create the pause, right? Because you can buy yourself some time, really, as a person's coming at you with a little bit of anger or whatever the emotion that they're coming at you with. There's a moment of them showing you how they actually perceive you. Like in that moment, it may be completely false and not align with how you view yourself at all. But there's a moment of them being honest. There's like this brutal honesty that's going on right there. If you're able to kind of be quiet, right? And like carry it out. And then if you can hold it, and then in that moment, then you can kind of reframe it. But that I love that moment and I hate that moment, right? Because it's someone coming at you in ways that you don't feel are truthful.
Right.
But it gives you an awesome opportunity to change the relationship in a positive way, because then you can say to them, help me understand that, right? That's very hard to say, but it changes things for people, because I just feel like when you say to a person, help me understand what you're saying, you shifted the narrative.
Right.
Because now the power dynamic is on them, because you're already saying, the first thing you said was help. So you're immediately saying, I need your help. So that person starts to slow down a little bit. Calm down just a little bit. Right? Because now they've taken a power role and they can say, this is what I'm trying to say. So for me, that moment, I like it. I hate it, right? But I love it because it can usually like build up a relationship pretty quick if you do it right.
And I think that phrase, help me understand, is so key to setting that up, because if you don't give them that power, then they just are going to continue to attack, because they're trying to gain some leverage over you and trying to say, okay, this is what needs to happen and you need to understand me.
Right.
That's
understand
the
me.
difficulty. So that's the key. One of the key elements when it comes to conflicts in general is that it's a bid for connection. It's an effort to try to gain clarity and understanding, mutual understanding, right?
Right.
And so this is why it's two sides of one coin, because the ability to regulate means that you can parse what you're trying to say through your emotions in a way that you can be understood. The problem is, if you can't regulate well, you're giving a ton of information that isn't really processed or clarified, and so it's really hard to understand you if you're not regulating, right? Whereas on the other side, if you're resilient, and I like the way you said that, Adrian. It's like the ability to be able to just withstand that onslaught, but the want to understand what they're trying to say, that de-escalates things right away. To be able to say, okay, there's a lot coming at me, and I want to hear it, but I can't understand it. And so the just simply saying I want to understand, and you can be resilient enough to do that without coming back at them and attacking them. Hey, we hope that you're enjoying this podcast, and we wanted to share something really exciting that we've been working on.
If you want to go deeper into the issue of conflict, particularly as it pertains to your marriage, we've created a comprehensive video course for you called Rules of Engagement. You'll get lesson videos, a companion workbook, case studies, and exercises to help you make practical steps to work through conflict in marriage. Watch it now on our website at watershedinitiative.com.
It's a game changer when it comes to conflict, right? It can shift the direction of where that conflict goes.
Right.
And I think this is where you see most relationships, whatever kind of relationship it is, go awry because they're fighting to win.
Right.
Yeah. There's always like, okay, I want to be, you got heard, I want to be heard. Let's everybody get heard, but nobody's listening. And so that causes the problem where it's just back and forth, and it just keeps going higher and higher and higher.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it can just be a complete miscommunication.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like when we say that, help me understand it, you immediately go, oh, okay, right? Like I had no idea that's what you were trying to say. Or that person reframes it completely. They start to change even, and they recognize, okay, let me say this in a different way. So it kind of just, it can calm down the moment, help that person go from lower brain, move up out of that lower brain area. Just give you, sometimes you just want to buy a little time, right? And those few seconds can give a person some breath, take a deep breath, and then we can kind of start back.
I think of resiliency as like, if it's a muscle, it's being able to flex that muscle for a long enough period of time, and that allows you to be able to withstand more. But as with any muscle, it can only be flexed for so long, right? You have to release that muscle at some point. So the idea is to build those muscles up to where we can withstand the weight of some of the conflicts a little bit more. The imagery, like if the dam was imagery in my mind for regulation, emotional regulation, the imagery in my mind for resiliency is like a tree that has a deep root system. Right, that is rooted deeply enough to be able to withstand the onslaught of a hurricane or a tornado of emotions that are coming at them. And so the more deeply rooted you are, and this has to do a little bit with how we root ourselves in terms of our self-worth and our identity. Because when we feel criticism or wrongly accused or blamed for something, it feels like that's an attack on who we are, or what's just or what's right. But if we are rooted a little bit more firmly in our self-worth, it becomes easier to withstand that onslaught. And so, if you kind of pair those two together, it's that as that dam releases the flow of emotions, how rooted that tree is in the path of that flow of water will determine how well that conflict goes, right? I'd like to be able to see if we can talk about these two concepts, these two sides of one coin, from different angles, from a standpoint of what it looks like in marriage conflict, what it looks like in family when you're talking with your kids or with your teens, because that's going to be the context that most of us understand and the ones that are going to be most important to us. So help me talk that out, because even as I say that, I think our listeners and us here in this room can know that there's a difference in how that conflict goes dependent upon who you're talking to. So
Absolutely.
Well, and even depending on how deeply rooted the other party is and how deeply rooted you are, really creates that power dynamic in who has to hold more, who has to be more resilient.
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, and if you realize, like, for example, with a parent and child relationship, obviously your child is not going to have as much resilience as you are, and you have to do the heavy lifting for them. And I see a lot of parents kind of miss this, so especially when their kids get to be teenagers. They start to kind of believe that they should have these skills, or they should be able to handle this conflict, or why aren't they getting it?
Or they should be able to watch their tone or respect them a certain way.
Yeah, respect is a big thing.
And I'm right there.
That word gets thrown out in every parent meeting I've ever
had. They're not respecting me. I'm like, well, let's back up a little bit and say, okay, they don't understand how to present it in a respectful way.
They're not regulating well.
And they need a chance. They need a chance to learn how to do that, and you can do that by modeling it for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's the biggest change when you're talking about between two adults and then an adult and a teen or adult and a child, is you have to model it as well as perform it. And if you don't have either of those skills, the emotional regulation or the resiliency, that becomes extremely difficult, and then you're basically just peer-to-peer at that point with your kid.
And that kind of goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning about how we learn conflict, right? So that we learn conflict by watching what happens when we're growing up. And so what was modeled for us becomes the framework. And so in many ways, if we want to change the framework for our kids, that we have to be able to model regulation and resiliency, because again, it was never taught to us, right?
Mhm.
And your kids aren't going to learn that just naturally. That has to be modeled for them in some way, and you have to kind of lead out on that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then a lot of times it becomes this role of do what I say or you're being disrespectful.
Yeah.
Period. And that's
Mhm.
it. Versus the aspect of saying your child has an opinion at some point. And obviously you're the mature one, you're the adult in this situation. You can hear what they have to say. You may not agree with it, and your
Yeah.
decision is still going to be the final decision. But a lot of times parents take it as they're being challenged, that
Mhm.
their parenthood is being challenged, they're not a good parent, or why is their child challenging them in that way? At that point, you absolutely have to have the regulation to be able to say, this isn't about me. This is a teenager that's acting out, and I need to handle it accordingly. There
Mhm.
doesn't need to be this back and forth because, to your point, then it becomes very much peer versus peer. And
Yeah.
that becomes this learned trait of this is how I can get people's attention. This is how I can solve a problem
Yeah.
or anything. And
Mhm.
that's how and we continue along that track. So to me, that's huge within the parent child relationship, but not even just teen. I mean, even I say that as a person who has a 6-year-old, there are moments where he's so lucid and he
Yeah.
has these conversations and he does, but at the same time, he's a 6-year-old. And if I have any kind of expectation of him to be mature and handle himself that way, then I'll get frustrated.
Yeah.
And whose problem is that really on? That's
Yeah.
on me
Yeah.
for trying to think that he's older and he can handle more than what he really can.
Mhm.
I would imagine that runs into parents that have teenagers as well.
Yeah.
Of, hey, you're 14, 15, 16 years old. It's time to do these things. At the same time, how do we get them to have that? How do we get them to have that responsibility and do those proper things that we're asking them to do? At the same time, as a parent, how do we structure it? How do we maintain our posture? How do we maintain our composure in those heated moments?
Yeah.
I think that's huge for the kids and how they mature and how they grow moving forward.
Mhm.
Personally,
Well, and I think that being okay with messing it up and going back and saying, "Hey, I messed that up,"
Yeah.
is
That's
really
that's
big.
key. Yeah.
Because you're not going to do it right all
Right.
the time, and
Right.
even in whatever relationship it is, you're not going to do it right, and you're gonna have times when you blow it and you lose your cool and you say stuff you don't mean. But when you're able to come back and go, okay, let's break this down and look at what actually happened here, it's ability to build in that resiliency and model that resiliency and emotional regulation for them
Right.
as well.
I think so. One of the things that I see as a stark difference between the way this works when it comes to parenting versus your marriage. So, in parenting world, I think the resiliency, as you said, Laura, holding and being resilient is a huge thing because you have to carry that weight for your kid. They can't be expected to regulate and communicate well. And so the more resilient you are, the more rooted you are, the more you can withstand a lot of messy communication, disrespect, whatever. And so when in that way, I'm actually reminded this is actually what it looks like for us as therapists. In the therapy room, we expect our clients to come in and just emote. We don't need them to necessarily regulate. We're not asking them to be composed. If it's messy, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And so our job as therapists is to help bring that messiness back into some kind of grounded framework so they can understand themselves better,
Mhm.
right? That's what we're doing. We have the level of resilience to be able to hear that messiness and to be able to gain understanding of that. Now, the difference though is that their expression isn't about us, right? So
Mhm.
we can take that a lot easier. Usually when it comes to parenting, your kid is just emoting everywhere and you as a parent might be the target, right? And so that resilience becomes crucial. Now, the difference that though I also see when it comes to that is that as therapists, we're thinking in our minds as the objective of this conversation is for me to help this person understand themselves better,
Mhm.
right? When you're in a conflict with your kid as a parent, that's probably not the first thing that you're thinking, right? It would be great if you could shift your mindset to say, my job as a parent right now is to help model for them regulation and resiliency. And so I need to help draw out from them what they're trying to say so that I can understand them better and they can understand themselves too. But usually our mindset is probably more they're really wrong and they need to be doing X, Y, and Z and they
Mhm.
shouldn't be doing A, B, and C, right?
Mhm.
So talk about from that standpoint, because you guys dealt in your therapy worlds, you delve more into that area when it comes to working with parents and teens and stuff like that, and just that shift of mindset when it comes to parents.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that parents have to deal with too is this my child is a reflection of me. My child represents us in the family out in the world, and these things that my child is doing impact the way I'm perceived as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge part for parents. And it's not necessarily that it's a conscious thing either. It's something that's like built into that relationship, because it's in a way it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, people are going to evaluate you and your family based on how everyone in the family acts,
Right.
and make judgment calls on you as a parent. So I think the key difference between as a therapist and as a parent, I mean, like, I don't do it well as a parent sometimes, a lot of times, but as a therapist, I don't have that connection to the person I'm dealing with, so
Right.
it's much easier to let that go.
Yeah. From a marriage standpoint, it's even so. From a parenting standpoint, you can shift power a little bit, because you can start thinking, okay, I'm the parent, they're the child, so I have to be more the one leading this and be the bigger person, the more mature person, and to make this a teaching moment, right? When it comes to marriage, that's removed. You're not typically thinking, okay, I'm going to model here. And so your motivation or your resiliency to be able to maintain that posture becomes a lot more difficult. And so I delve more into the area of marriage, and so that's something I will see a lot in terms of a breakdown for people to be able to know how to maintain that resiliency, to be able to hear their spouse out long enough to understand what they're saying, right? And so maybe talk that out in terms of what you guys see in your marital cases, but also in your home life. I'll say for me, again, like this, a lot of these things, that we're talking about, like, I've been doing them for the past 10 years. I teach it a lot, but if you're a fly on the wall in my house with between Dana and I, that moment, a lot of this goes out the window, and it's really hard for me to be resilient. And so again, I kind of see it as a muscle that I have to continue to build. But I find that the more that I can do that, to be able to stop for a moment and say, okay, my wife is trying to say something to me that I don't agree with, I deeply disagree with, I think is wrong and just not right. But there's something deeper that I need to be able to understand. I have to be resilient enough to be able to pause and try to understand and listen and ask her to clarify, right? Talk about it from that standpoint when the stakes are a little bit higher for you guys.
For me, I think one of the biggest aspects is that just to be able to hold the emotion, because if I can hold the emotion, then I can quickly understand what my wife is trying to get across, the point that she's trying to get across, and why she's so frustrated in that moment. Then I can. Easier said than done, and I don't always do a really good job of that. Sometimes it's like someone comes at you and you just go right back up, right? And that's the whole aspect of being able to hold, right? And that's, to me, one of the things of getting better at and seeing yourself getting better at it. You start to see the relationship change in a better way, because the person recognizes, even if they're being upset, and you'll notice it too. I've noticed it in couples counseling. Yeah. Once one particular person in the couple has began to be able to hold and show more resiliency, the other person will start as well. Specifically being because they know they're out of line. They can literally feel in the room that they're starting to create frustration, and the other person's still trying to maintain calmness. And that's something that we've been working on. Yeah. So in that, a lot of times for it to shift, it can just take one person. And I think a lot of times when I explain that to couples, there's even more pushback, because then the question comes in, well, then why on earth do I have to be the one?
Why do I got to be the one doing it?
Why do I have to do the heavy lifting?
We're here because of him, right? So I still have to be the one to change. But a lot of times that one person changing.
Yeah, one person can change the dynamic.
Well, I mean, that goes back to, like, you guys are connected. When you're in a relationship, you're in a family, you're all connected. And if one person moves, everybody else has to move. Yeah. You have no choice.
Yeah, yeah. I think on the other end of that, as resiliency is taxed, and it's a difficult thing, but that's something that can be learned, and it can shift the situation dramatically. The other side of that is the regulation piece. And so I know for myself, the moment I feel triggered, like, what makes it hard is knowing, why am I so upset? What is this specific thing that I'm actually upset about? And what I oftentimes realize is that either what has triggered me in that moment, in that conflict, isn't actually the thing that I'm upset about. Maybe it happened, an hour ago or something like that. Or that there's a deeper level of meaning behind what what I was upset about. It takes a lot of regulation for me to kind of process through, well, you know what, the reason why that upset me was because it actually hit a nerve for me in this area, or because it reminded me of this factor, or this dynamic between the two of us that I realized I'm building up some frustration about, right? So to be able to parse that out and to be able to know yourself well enough, again, resiliency allows you to be able to understand a person, but regulation means that you got to be able to understand yourself, right? And so, in terms of again, marriage or in parenting, like talk through some of the things that you observed there and how important that processing skill is going to be.
Well, I don't know if you guys ever do this, but like sometimes when I'm in a conflict, I'm in my head going, "Stop talking! You need to stop talking." You know you're not.
I'm doing that right now, Laura.
You need to be less in this conversation. You need to be more in your head, figuring out why you're saying what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because what you're saying isn't effective, and it's also hurtful.
Yeah.
And so, I'll tell my clients all the time. I'm like, I do it. I mess it up all the time. And I'm telling myself, yeah, you shouldn't be saying that.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of trying to then build in that ability to then step back from that conversation and be, hey, we need to pause this for a minute and we need to walk away from this. And I need a chance to reorganize and think about this before we re-engage.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think part of it too is also understanding your partner.
Mm-hmm.
Laura and I were talking about this earlier. The aspect of just recognizing like your specific partner might process a little bit slower than you would like.
Yeah.
Or they might
That's true.
process a little bit faster than you would like. There's just that aspect of being able to just hold off for a second and have that patience with your partner and letting them have the opportunity to process, or your child, even more so probably with your child, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is to give them the opportunity to process and understand that. And a lot of it comes down to you being able to regulate your emotions during that time and having that resiliency to say, this isn't about me. Them not talking or them not having an immediate answer, it's not about me.
Mm-hmm.
They just need some time to process.
Yeah.
I'll give them the time to process, and then we'll come back to it and talk about it and discuss it and have a good conversation. For me, when those moments happen, then the conversation is a lot smoother.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus sometimes it feels like there's a push to have that person process quickly.
Yeah.
I need an answer now.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one
Give me
a
the answer.
resolution and fix right
Absolutely.
now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a love and logic principle that I learned way back in like a PTA meeting or something way long ago. So PTA is good for stuff. Come on, it's good for stuff.
Shout out to PTA.
Yes, but it's the principle is that you don't necessarily have to discipline or engage at the moment that the problem happens.
Yeah.
Right.
That you can delay punishment, you can delay the conversation,
A decision. Yeah.
Right.
whatever. You don't have to do it right then. And a lot of people don't understand that, or they want to like fix it fast to get rid of the pain.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And being able to say, hey, this is a problem and I need to think about it is an extremely important skill, especially in parenting, because it allows the child to have a chance to think about it, allows you to have a chance to think about it, and brings down the level of emotion.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode on regulation and resiliency. We're going to pick this up in the next episode, and so definitely tune into that one if you want to continue this discussion with us. We're going to cover in that episode some concepts like triggers, emotional flooding, and creating a wider window. We've talked about a little bit of that today in this episode, but we're going to build off of that. And so definitely tune into that episode if you want to just listen a little bit more. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening. Now, if you benefited from this podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, share with your friends, and make sure to leave us a review on iTunes. It really does help us to keep making podcasts and more content like this possible for you. If you have any questions, want to get more content, or just want to stay connected with us, go to our website at watershedinitiative.com and follow us on social media. Lastly, if you want to get connected with a life coach or therapist, call us at our collaborative group practice, Lifeology in Richardson and Frisco, Texas at 214-556-0996.